I come to you today with a very different kind of video. About 8 months ago, I made a video on the Trials series. In that video, I had to make a lot of speculation about the development of the series, as there's almost no publicly available information on it. All we do have is pre-release interviews that are meant more to hype up the release of the next game than to really give insight into the development process. Well, after I uploaded that video, one of the developers actually commented on it, and we got to talking. After a long back and forth, we were finally able to get a time where both our schedules lined up, and we had over an hour to discuss Trials, the development process, how to design difficult games, and what might have happened to the series. So, it is my pleasure to introduce Stanislav Kostyuk, the former lead game designer at Ubisoft Kyiv for Trials Fusion, Trials of the Blood Dragon, and Trials Rising. One detail I'll add before we start is that if you want subtitles for this video, use the subtrack I made. I don't trust YouTube's auto-generated subtitles when it comes to accents, so I went through the trouble of making my own. And with that, I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hey, Editing Raven here, just popping in for a quick note. Me and Stanislav basically live on opposite sides of the earth, so if you notice the choppiness in the video, it's because I had to cut out all the sections where there's a delay between one of us saying something and the other person hearing it. So I cut out those parts to make the conversation flow more naturally, but it does mean the video's a little bit choppy. I did what I could. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thanks. Thanks. Finally, we have managed to convene a time that worked for both of us.
First off, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
All right. So the first one we had here was you mentioned in your comment originally that there was a few details in my video that I did not get quite correct about the story of the development and especially the history of Ubisoft Kyiv with the Trials series.
Okay, yes. So, relationship between Ubisoft Kyiv and Red Links has started approximately in 2014, before I joined Ubisoft at the beginning of 2015. So the very first, the beginnings was, Ubisoft Kyiv was just doing the PC port for Fusion. But then when I joined the studio, Red Links, they were doing the post-launch support for Trials Fusion with various DLCs and new features, and they needed some assistance for various features. And just as I joined Ubisoft Kyiv, that's when we sort of started working on Trials Fusion directly. Those features, for example, things that I have done for Trials Fusion was the Spectre mode, the the updated store interface, some. I think it was cross-platform leaderboards or cross-platform track sharing, one of those two. But so various stuff like that. So it started pretty simple. But during that collaboration, we have sort of developed enough trust that then when Red Links decided to make Trials with the Blood Dragon, we were instantly from the get-go started as this support team helping out with the platforming that was introduced as a new feature in that game, helping out with the home base of the main characters, with the meta, with the leaderboards, and a bunch of other stuff. And Red Links was sort of focusing mostly on the content and the story. And then again, through that collaboration, the trust once again has strengthened even more, so that when time came for Trials Rising, we basically became a full code dev studio. So Red Links was responsible for the overall creative vision, of course, and the tracks and assets, while we, from our side, were responsible for most of the programming, as well as pretty much all game design related stuff that was outside of tracks. So everything from progression and basically everything that's outside of tracks was on Kyiv's side, and that's what I and my team of 2 people have worked on.
So it's just 2 people there working on it.
From design part, yes, it was 3 people, but the Kyiv
Wow.
team was like 50 people in total.
Right.
And Trials Rising had the most people on it out of all Trials projects, about 100 people, 50 from Red Link side and 50 from our side. So Yeah, the collaboration started small, but by the time Trials Rising came around, yeah, we were really on the actual code dev studio that had like direct involvement. I even, I was the one who prepared the pitch deck to go to HQ to get green light for the budget from Eve back in the day. So we had shared responsibilities.
Right, right.
And in terms of sales, I think yeah, you were using the PC, Steam.
Yeah, it was the most easily accessible numbers.
Yeah, so there were sort of two things about that which would be relevant at that time. I'm not sure how they would be relevant now with Ubisoft coming back to Steam as well more prominently.
Right.
But one thing to note is that back in those days, Uplay was actually gaining a lot of traction.
Hmm.
And for example, even on PC, I remember this before Trials Rising came out. I remember there was a similar discussion online about For Honor, that nobody
Mm.
played on PC For Honor because of the
Right, right.
Steam. But then I was looking at the data internal. It was like, okay, of course there was a lot of like console players, but on PC most players were on Uplay at the time. So it was like, yeah, people just don't have access to the data.
Right.
And similarly, yeah, Trials Rising was most played through Uplay directly. Um, I'm not sure. I don't know how things have changed now. That there is this new Ubisoft Connect thing that honestly doesn't seem that it's a big improvement over Uplay in many cases, especially considering that there have been a bunch of features have been deactivated. But I don't know. I haven't worked at Ubisoft since 2021, so I wouldn't know how that works for them.
Fair enough.
But yeah, and also even considering that, the proportion of players on PC was always much smaller, even though, taking these Uplay's number into account.
Mm.
And that's also one of the reasons why we have introduced full cross-platform multiplayer, cross-platform progression, cross-platform competition. That was the primary motivation was the PC players, because comparatively to the console players, they didn't have enough people to play against.
Hmm.
So it was because of the PC players that were like, okay, we really want to make sure that everybody can play together.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because Trials. Oh, now I'm forgetting the name. The first one that was originally on Xbox did really well on console and sort of built a large console audience for the series after the original much smaller PC games with the Flash one. So makes sense that this
Yeah.
community would stay in the console space.
You're probably speaking either about HD or Evolution, I
Yeah,
suppose.
Evolution, that's the one I was thinking of. Yeah,
Yeah.
just spaced the name. Yeah, and so I guess that can move us pretty smoothly into the second question, which was what aspect of the series that you and your team worked on do you feel the most proud of?
Uh,
Or a couple, if because I imagine it's hard to pick one.
yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, I suppose if you count hours, I have spent like about 10,000 hours of my life on trials. If you count like all the work days and the years. And
I can imagine.
uh, one feature that I'm proud of the most that has got into the game is probably the customization, the gear customization of Trials Rising,
Mm.
because it was, I mean, it was a huge challenge to put that in.
Yeah, I can
I
imagine.
mean, from my part, it's like I remember it was like me and my producer and some programmers were just like discussing things. It's like, hey, would it be cool about like that? And we were looking at various like the car-based games like Need for Speed and others, and how you can really like personalize your cars there. And we were like, well, would we be able to bring that to trials somehow? And um, yeah, so to list all the possible, no, not all the possible, all the challenges that we had to go through first, trials, the customization items, they Usually because it's like clothing or on motorbikes, there's not a lot of surface area to put the decals on. That was like nothing to consider. Yeah. And you know there's like these round all these like round pants, jackets, everything that you had to consider how to move around that from technical perspective and you know the UX perspective, but
Yeah.
also just very simple, like we had to go to Helsinki to the Red Link studio to talk to all the artists because the um, the assets that they were already making for Trials Rising, they were making it the way that would work for like previous games where decals weren't a thing, and basically that system had entirely different UV mapping.
Yeah.
So if we would reuse that, then the way it worked before, then basically UV mapping was mirrored. So it's like if you try to put a decal on one half, then it
Right.
would be automatically mirrored on the other half.
Right.
So we basically had to talk to them to like discuss about okay, what changes have to be made to change how you make the UV mapping for these new assets, what has to be redone, and then all this planning for, okay, what we also have to do. Because, you know, when you're making customization that's not, you know, easily editable, then it's like you want to provide as much variety as possible in terms of textures and stuff like that. But then it's like, if the point is, hey, we want people to create and share items, then it needs to be more like, you know, foundations and templates that they can use. So it's like, okay, let's try to think of more models that we can add, more stuff like that. A lot of time I went into talking with artists to plan all that stuff. And also, I think that's not always considered is the server implications, because, you
Mm.
know, it's like, okay, we have all these decals. So basically, when on a technical level, when you place a decal on an item, that's like there will be like a few bytes of information about it's like or the decal ID, the position, the coordinates, and stuff like that. The colors, basically everything related to it that will be that will be placed there. And it's just a few bytes. But when you think about okay, you can place potentially 500, 1000 decals on an item, and
Yeah.
then these items have to be stored with the ghosts so you could see
Yeah.
customization from other
Yeah.
people. And on the traction, like anybody can just like put to the limit, and like we had to calculate like how like what are our reasonable costs, and also like the uh not only that, but also like the I forgot the name of the term. The bandwidth. Bandwidth.
Bandwidth. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so that we would have enough bandwidth so people would not be blocked by all those consecutive players playing to take all this
Right.
customization
Right.
all
Right.
the time. So yeah, we had to, based on that, we had to make first some limits on the amount of decals, some concessions, some we had to do all these calculations to see how far can we push this. And yes, and then obviously from the front end side, like how do you actually place all these items, how you control things, what are all of the edge
Yeah.
cases. So it was a feature that took a really long time, and the originally like required a bit of pushing so everybody would get fired up about it, because how it's like the old customization system worked fine. So it's technically not something that was absolutely required for trials. But what we really wanted from our Kiev side, and in general, we wanted like to, if we go back to the core pillars that we have defined for Trials Rising, we have defined it as the three pillars: competition, creativity, and community. And one thing that we wanted to do was to make sure that newcomers would understand what the hardcore fans actually feel, like they could get trials as hardcore fans do, because previous trials games, you'll get at some points at various tutorials, like for example in Trials Fusion. In sorry, I'm rambling
No,
a bit,
no,
but
this is
I think it's
great.
okay. Um,
It's all very interesting, so I'm happy to hear it.
so in Trials Fusion, in the Bunny Hub tutorial, which I think was campaign number 3, but I might be wrong. But basically, the amount of players were reaching the Bunny Hub tutorial, and then they will all just like dropping off completely after that.
Right.
As soon as like they got to the tutorial, and then like the level started implementing the necessary things for bunny hops, and it's just like one thing is like, okay, yeah, we didn't explain it properly, and that's why we have invited Fat Shady to help out with the tutorial design, since he had like some really good stuff on YouTube. But also, there was this whole question of, okay, how do we make all these less hardcore players feel the same excitement as hardcore players do? And one
Right.
thing that a lot of hardcore players do is make tracks, make their content, and share it.
Mhm.
But track editor is an insanely complex thing. And
Yeah.
that's why we wanted to have something that players could create that would be much simpler and
Right.
share. So
Yeah.
that would be the customization. So that's why we have pushed for it so much. And yeah, in the end, it turned out great. Like I remember seeing so many great stuff that people were doing with the system. It's
Yeah,
insane.
yeah. I mean, I can say from personal experience, every time I unlocked a new bike throughout the campaign portion, I spent like at least an hour just covering them in stickers because it was just really fun to, as you're saying, get
Cool. That's really nice to hear. Thank you.
that sense of personalization. And also, it's very interesting to hear the thought process behind it because I think a lot of series which have a hardcore fan base but have difficulty connecting to new players go the route of trying to make the game easier to attract the new players, but often that has the issue of alienating the hardcore
Yeah.
players who miss the original depth. And so it's interesting to hear that your team took the approach of trying to improve the learning resources so that it didn't alienate either player base. And I can't speak for everyone, but from my experience, I think it worked great because the tutorials in it meant that I was able to tackle, any challenge that came up after that, and it felt like it taught them in a very reasonable order. So I think that's some very impressive design.
Thank you. Well, yeah, it wasn't just the tutorials, of course. It was also things like contracts exist because of that. The primarily reason contracts is not just for to have some quests, is to, have push again those newcomers, those newer players to replay missions without asking them to, hey, replay and get better at it. It's like, hey, just go back here and do the stuff, but then they get to learn the track a bit more without
Right, right.
necessarily realizing it. So there's that aspect. Then there was also the change that was, I know when it was announced, it was a bit controversial, and we knew it would be a bit controversial with the fault penalty, the timer penalty for faults. But in the end, that change also has worked out really well. I don't know if you remember, but in the previous trials games, there
Mhm.
was, the fault was the primary thing in the leaderboards and scoring, and the timer was the secondary.
Yeah, yeah, and even for unlocking the medals, it would have a time
Yeah,
section, but it would also have a fault category. So you had to achieve both at the same time if you wanted to get the highest medal.
yeah. And basically it led to these situations that hardcore players obviously were fine with them, and it was exciting for them. Like you could complete a track in a minute, and another player complete like a track uh, in 55 seconds, but because they had like one fault in those 55 seconds, they were much much lower on the leaderboards. And from a more like newcomerish perspective, that didn't feel as fair. So we were trying to think, okay, how can we make this leaderboard climbing competitive aspect a bit more mid-core casual friendly, again, without ruining it for the hardcore players. And yeah, the it took, again, I think it's about, yeah, on one hand, it feels like a very little decision, but it took like I think 3 or 4 months of discussion and testing, because it was so
Yeah.
um, important for us. And in the end, we went for this mechanic of we sort by time, and then fault is, we get the extra time penalty. And we tested it a lot to make sure that you couldn't really abuse the system at the top
Yeah.
of the leaderboards. But because at the top it still has to be as perfect as possible. But that's also why we were generally fine with this approach in terms of, okay, we know that people at the top, they still need to, the top 1000 who are like the most competitive players, they still need to complete the track with zero faults to be the best. It's
Hmm.
extremely unlikely to have this situation where you have one fault but you're higher, which is not
Yeah.
great for the top players,
Yeah.
but it's really good for the middle and lower players because it feels less punishing that you have faulted, but you can still like defeat your friend from your console, it's like, or
For
something
sure.
like that.
For sure. Yeah, I can say playing Fusion and Rising in very close proximity, which I have personally as someone who enjoys the speedrunning aspect of them, I find that, yeah, it was a lot more satisfying when it just added time to the clock because I would have times in Fusion where I would be well under the time barrier for, say, a platinum medal, but uh, wouldn't get it because I had one fault. And so I think, yeah, I agree. I think it's a nice solution, which makes it feel more satisfying when, you're not a pro player.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and yeah, but that was pretty much like the main approach, like a whole of things that were added or changed in Trials Rising. It was all this how basically that was like the main goal. It's like we want to make like the biggest trials game that would attract the most newcomers. And I was like, okay, we attract newcomers, how do we make them stay, how do we make them appreciate what trials is, because we didn't want to change trials, but we wanted to make sure that they feel what the hardcore players feel, that they get those same emotions, and even if they don't become like the most hardcore players in the world, but still to
But they
get
can
those,
understand it.
yeah,
Yeah.
that they can understand it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that also will move us pretty smoothly into the third one, which is looking back, is there anything that you wish could have turned out differently or could have been changed for Trials Rising?
So one thing that I'm sort of, it's not necessarily, oh, I would have done it differently,
Right.
but also it's like, but what if we, but what if we did do it differently though? So for context, Ubisoft is obviously a big corporation housing thousands of developers. It needs, not only to make games, but also to make money through live services, through whatever other needs there are. It's like it's
For
this
sure.
combination of, creativity and business, and you have to find compromises. And
Hmm. That's the nature of the entertainment industry in
yes,
general.
yes. And one thing that they really pushed to us at one point in time, and that's because Rainbow Six Siege was popular. They wanted us to have like add a bike every 2 months, a new bike every 2 months,
Right.
like Siege added
Yeah, like
operatives,
the operators.
and we were pushing back against that because we had these bikes, the Rhino and the Mantis, which were like our core competitive bikes, and then any other bikes that we would add, it would just have to be like a fun bike, we call them, something that people could
Right.
fool around with, but we're not and compete with those bikes in the local bike leaderboards, but they should not become something that, oh, it overtakes the meta, it becomes better than the competitive bikes, because then it's a competition, because sorry, it becomes pointless. And that leads to the situation where, okay, this has to be thoroughly tested, thoroughly tuned, and it's like a single bike, it's at least like 5-6 months of work for that. So it's like,
Right.
why the, just because of this whole process. So it's like either we like, hurry a lot and just like make a lot of bikes that might break the balance, or we do something else. And we convinced HQ that we would do something else. And the thing that we sort of sold to them was the loot boxes. But the thing about the loot boxes and the way we implemented them in trials is that they're not great for actual monetization
Yeah.
because we didn't want to ruin this gear sharing aspect, creation and sharing.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we made it like very generous in the sense that you can actually get everything through practically everything through in-game currency. And there's like only a few unique loot box monetization only stuff which when Trials Rising was released, I was already on Watch Dogs Legion. I was on another project, but I saw that loot boxes were not really bringing a lot of monetary value, and I'm pretty sure that Ubisoft HQ, I didn't have conversations with Ubisoft HQ about
Right.
that, but I'm
Right.
pretty sure they weren't exactly happy that it wasn't. And so yeah, so that's the thing I'm wondering is if would have made trials more monetizable, would Ubisoft more readily greenlight another game? Because that it has been how many 7 years
I,
since Trials Rising?
I think, yeah, it was 2019. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So 7 years, no new Trials games, but a lot of other games that have some sort of live support or some sort of post-launch monetization that worked for Ubisoft since then at the time, including Siege and For Honor. They're still doing the rounds. They're working really well.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so yeah, so that's sort of the thing. I'm not saying that I would necessarily change things because again, I
Right.
think like the community aspect of trials, the possibility to like create and share is
For sure.
from a purely creative standpoint, what Trials Rising was as a project, it was really important. But also, it was like, there's this question, yeah, we stood our ground and stood by our principles, but did we maybe sort of block the future of Trials by doing that? Would Trials have maybe a better future had we decided to compromise here more and focus more on monetization?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's a difficult question because on
Yeah,
the one hand, for sure, as a player, like I love that, I don't have to spend any more real world money to access all of those features you're talking about. And as you mentioned earlier, that you put so much effort into the customization features, and then to lock the potential of that behind having to spend more money would remove that option for a lot of players. So it is, it's something which is definitely as a player I like, but then I also totally hear what you're saying about that. And, as we were saying with the entertainment industry, making money is and has to be a part of it. And, especially looking at how Ubisoft has been doing over the past few years, you can understand why they would want something which is sure to make them more money. And so it's just that classic conflict you have when art and business come together, because
yeah,
what's best for the art is not always what's best for the business, and what's best for the business is not always what's best for the art.
yeah. And there is no right answer to the question because it's like,
Yeah.
it's and again, it's not a like maybe another project would have been greenlit, but by doing that would have alienated the existing audience, and then the next one would have been problematic. Like you can't say for sure.
Yeah, yeah, because yeah, if you did put in a lot of monetization, who knows if it still would have actually made the money, because as you say, could alienate the existing players. So yeah, it's a difficult question to know the right answer to, because as you say, there isn't really one right answer to it. Well, I guess speaking of the potential future of the series, obviously you can't say anything about that, and that's totally fair. But in a pure hypothetical, if there was to be one more Trials game, is there anything in particular you wish you could have added or changed or brought to the series if there was going to be another entry?
Um, I mean, for sure. So one thing about Trials, and so for Trials Rising, obviously we didn't implement everything that we wanted to.
I'm sure that goes for basically every project.
Yes, but for what we were thinking about Trials Rising, like we were thinking that we were setting up foundation for a bunch of stuff that would then be able to do in the future in a next Trials game that I hope maybe is being worked on now, but who knows.
I'm sure we all do.
But basically one thing with this, I talked a bit about like the pillars that we have defined, the competition, creativity, community, and this thing of, okay, we want newcomers to feel what hardcore players do. What we wanted to, like, our end goal with all these features like customization and stuff like that, like we wanted basically to transform Trials into a game owned by players,
Mm,
where everything that is happening in the community right now, sort of outside of the game,
right.
would actually happen inside. So, because there's a lot of friction again, when you have to go somewhere on YouTube or on another website to find people, to talk to
Right,
people, to
right.
participate in, let's say, player-made tournaments, that's a lot of friction to go through. That not many people they might not necessarily be aware something like is happening. But then, if you put it in game, make it more visible, make it more easier to access. Um then it's you remove a big barrier, and then you sort of make even those players who like are more casual, then they might want to participate in those kind of things from time to time. And stuff that we thought about was stuff like, hey, what if, like, we already had like the replays and spectator modes and stuff like that. What if you like could just like cut a part of levels as like of those replays as sort of like mini movies and share them like the best moments, and so
Mm,
people could do that. Another thing that so another feature that it was actually not fully designed on paper, but it had a significant progress in its design, where we figured out a lot of questions, but we didn't put it in we didn't have the scope for it in the original release, and as far as I know, it wasn't added post launch as well. um, it's the So one thing, sort of a culmination of everything that we would be doing, was player hosted tournaments in the game. So, for
right.
example, a prominent Trials creator could, let's say, make a unique item in our customization editor,
Hmm.
or ask somebody to make a unique item in customization or something really cool, and then, create a tournament in the game that could be either like synchronous or asynchronous depending on the setting, and then they choose the map, they make the rules, and then if they want they can like stream it, because we had all these proper tools that would make that possible, with like, again, with the spectator mode and with all those controller layouts and stuff like that that we have
Right.
added. So it's like, hey, and then they could make this competition, and then players would compete again, either asynchronously or synchronously, depending on what like the host has wanted. And then, like, okay, this first person who wins the tournament, they get this unique item that the creator has done, and now it's like their badge of honor that, hey, I have won this tournament from this like creator, and like that's the only one in existence.
Right,
Stuff
right.
like that. So that's sort of what um, there's a saying about, now with Fortnite and other games, a lot of people talk about like games as a platform.
Hmm.
But even those games, there's still more games as a service, because a lot of things require developer input.
Right.
But what we wanted to do ultimately, like the ultimate Trials dream, was, okay, so we'll step by step we would get to this, where we get push out this next Trials,
Hmm.
and then we do some content for it, of course, but the content that we do is not, something for players to churn through. It's like all these possible tools
Right.
for them to do whatever they want in the game with the community and basically do that indefinitely. And
Right.
at the time when this game as a platform moniker wasn't as known, we sort of like called it, hey, it's gonna be like a platform of its own.
Mm.
Uh, that the community would start to own and
Right. Right.
yeah, create, share, talk with each other. It's like that was like the ultimate dream.
Oh, okay.
So that's what yeah, so to answer your question, that's sort of, if I had to work in another Trials game, I would want to keep pushing for that, because again, the more people participate in this kind of stuff, the healthier it is for the community.
Right.
And the
Yeah.
way for more people to participate in it is to remove as many barriers as possible.
Yeah.
And there is no better way to remove barriers than to make all this stuff happen, through the game directly.
For sure. For sure. Well, looking at my next question, you've somewhat answered it throughout the others, but if there's anything you wanted to add in particular, or just to summarize your thoughts on it, as you were a lead designer on the Trials series, which is a famously difficult series of games, what would you suggest to other developers looking to create a difficult game but to make it approachable? Because I think that's something that was accomplished well in the Trials series. And so, if you had any further thoughts on that, on top of what you'd said already, or if you just wanted to summarize them, I think it's something that, at least for me, I'm interested to hear.
Yeah, so again, not every difficult game is like made the same. So for example,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
some of the things that I say might not necessarily be applied to something like, I don't know, let's say Dark Souls.
for
uh,
sure, for
but
sure.
um, but in general, there are two, yes, yeah, two really important principles. One is not overwhelm players with useless information,
Right,
or information that they don't know yet how to utilize.
right,
So when we were making like the first versions of the tutorials, for example, one of the things that we have added, and so we have when we're developing Trials, we have like formed a group called Trials Elite, where we have invited a bunch of very prominent people from Trials community at the time, so they could give us feedback on various things
right,
and during development. And we showed them a feature that it is in the game now. It's where you see the suspension levels, the leaning levels, like all those kind of things. There's like an option to turn on UI, so you could like see all of that. And that was like our first thing, our first thought about like what new players would appreciate. And and those hardcore Trials Elite fans were like, yeah, 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 this is an awesome feature, it's amazing, yeah, yeah. And we're like, okay, yeah, it works really well then. But then when you actually saw play tests of like people trying to interact with, like, they didn't know like what information they were looking at. It's like it didn't say, like, they didn't know what levels the suspension had to be for this, for like, they didn't understand. And I was like, oh, okay, okay. So that's why, for example, I know that Fat Shady, I think he used it in some of his videos that he was doing for the tutorial level, so sort of like show some things. But in general, it's like, hey, yeah, it's like if you just like show this kind of stuff to players, they don't understand what to make of it, and it just confuses them even more.
right.
So that's like one thing. It's like, hey, the information has to be, immediately useful. And then the second thing is, try to teach just like one thing at a time. In Trials Rising, again, you could potentially. So Trials Rising is a pretty free-form game. So if you felt up to it, like you could like complete a bunch of lessons at the same time, or in parallel or go to like a bunch of different pathways. But yeah, the most newcomerish of players who like leading them through a path where they will have to just like learn one new mechanic, one new trick at a time,
Right.
because that's very important. And then when you teach them, it's also very important that you give them space to train what you've taught them and to get better at it, which was actually like a problem that we have noticed was a pretty significant problem in previous trials games, where there would be like there would be a tutorial that would teach some specific mechanic for like bike maneuvering of what you
Mm-hmm.
can do, and then the next levels would come, and then they would be necessary in like the next
Right.
3, 4, 5, 6 levels. So it's like, and then it's like when that happens, you're sort of losing this momentum of like that, letting them to train what you've taught them, and then by the time they do need them, they didn't have the muscle memory trained enough to
Yeah.
go through the challenge. Yeah, which is something that we fixed in Trials Rising.
Yeah, and just
Um,
to comment on that, it was something I really noticed, which I thought was just a very good choice for the tutorials in it, is that it doesn't just show you how to do whatever technique it's describing. It then gives you multiple different scenarios where that technique is useful so that you can practice it not just in a vacuum, but in the scenarios which you're then going to see it in the levels, which is, again, as a player, was a great way to introduce those ideas and to teach them in a way that, as you say, didn't lose momentum, that then the next level uses that thing you've just
yeah,
learned and now you go, oh, hey, there it is. And then there's that immediate satisfaction of feeling like you've improved because now you can tackle this new obstacle.
yeah, and that's what you mentioned. The feeling you've improved. That's like what's most important, because what's when a lot of players actually don't mind difficulty, but what they have problem with is like the feeling of they're just like banging against the wall with no
Right.
understandable progress. And that's sort of what you have to work on improving most of the time when like working on the levels of games with high skill ceilings, such as Trials. And
Mm-hmm.
and yet at the same time, and again, this also is sort of like um, you need to make sure that players understand what the game actually is. And again, in terms of Trials, this comes back to this whole question: how let newcomers appreciate the game? But one thing, like for example, if you look at Trials Fusion, a lot of first levels in Trials Fusion, they're very flowy, they're very fast, a lot of big jumps, a lot of epicness, a lot of like stuff like that. And but what it did was it sort of like created an impression that Trials was sort of like this semi-platforming racing game where it's all about like the tricks, the spectacle, the speed.
Mm-hmm.
That when uh, eventually the game started introducing like all those more technical aspects, people were suddenly falling off because suddenly
Right.
they were not prepared for that. So that's also sort of like a very important thing that do not. And we also have some spectacle in the first levels of Trials Rising, but we really wanted to make sure that from the get-go, the way the tracks are set up, the way the progression is set up, that people will understand that this is not about necessarily racing as fast, pressing gas and racing as fast as
Right.
possible and making the biggest jumps, because sometimes biggest jumps are bad. Sometimes you want jumps to be smaller to save time, and that's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to make sure that you teach the players and help them understand. Yeah.
Right. So make sure they know from the start what they're in for so that they don't
Yeah.
feel like they got, a bait and switch later on if the gameplay doesn't
Yep.
match what their expectation is. Uh,
Exactly. Yeah.
so my next question was, what did you find the most difficult about working on the Trials series? What was the biggest challenge when developing them?
All three I worked on, or Trials Rising specifically?
Well, whichever you'd prefer. If you think there's a more interesting story from one of the others, I'd be happy to hear that. But if it's about the same, then.
Well, um, So the platforming for in Trials of the Blood Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially a feature of the way it works now in the game. That's essentially was done about a month or a month and a half before the game's release. One of our programmers had to like work on a lot, and we had to invite a person from the Rayman team to also
Right.
help with a lot of stuff because. So here's the thing: Trials engine
Mm-hmm.
uh, was not made for on-foot
I
platforming,
can imagine.
and but when there was this idea from Anti and the Blood Dragon director about, hey, let's like combine the two together. And it's like, yeah, and also have like some jump platforming and shooting. The original intention was that we would sort of like fake the platforming by essentially making invisible wheels
Right.
for the player and then attaching, because we didn't have an animation system, we just had like the physics system for the
Right.
character.
Right.
So we're like, okay, let's make invisible wheels and attach like the player's knees and foot to them, and then sort of like mimic we're controlling actually a
Right.
bike.
Right.
And but then like the wheels sort of, it looked like crap, it felt like crap, it was like,
Oh
okay.
man.
um Eventually, and Trials of the Blood Dragon, I think it was made in less than a year.
Wow.
um it started summer 2015, and it went gold about Mayish 2016, because at E3 it already had to be released.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so it was like a very like a fast-paced production, and it was never seen as like a core Trials game. It's like a fun spin-off, but
Right.
yeah, but there was like this platform, and yeah, so we had to make. Yeah, we realized that this didn't work well at all. So we actually had to add a proper animation system into the game, a proper,
Whew.
you know, character controller that, we would have a capsule that could be moved around, and then, and, but again, originally when we added that, because we didn't have like a lot of functionality, it was all still like physics based. Like, for example, the way the jump would work in the middle of in the middle of development after we have started. The way jump would work is that we would just like send a physic impulse upwards,
Yeah.
but then it was like really difficult to control your jumps and where you jumped and where you landed and all that kind of stuff. And we realized that the time was passing, and we were improving things, but it was just not going fast enough, because it's like, hey, when an engine like the Trials engine is just not made for platforming at all, it's like it's
Yeah.
difficult to comprehend at first like all the things that it needs. So yeah, so
Yeah.
we have invited, 2 months before we had to go gold, we have invited a person from Raymond team to like give us feedback and share their experience, because obviously they have worked, they have made like amazing platformers, and they're
For
like,
sure. For sure.
yeah, you have to redo everything. And
Oh,
then
that's not the feedback
and
you want.
yeah, they were right, and yeah, and they were basically gave a list of everything that we needed, and then one of our programmers in Kiev, he basically spent a month and a half after to just like redoing all the platforming systems,
Yeah.
so that, and it's in the end product, I suppose it's still not the best platforming ever made, but it's fine platforming, and that's already a huge achievement.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stories in game dev about a lot of games that were famously troubled in development for one reason or another. A lot of them is a similar story of they needed to use an engine which wasn't designed for the genre they were making, and so that process of trying to rework an engine to create gameplay mechanics it was never designed for is never an easy process, at least from what I've read. Haven't done it
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah, it isn't. Yeah. So basically we had that experience and we were like, we're not doing that again on trials.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, it was like I remember when Trials Rising was starting, there was like one early question: do we keep the platforming stuff because maybe the community would like to use it in some of their tracks, or like
Right.
no, we because if we keep it and let it be usable in track editing for community and those kind of things, then we had to polish it
Yeah.
because the way Blood Dragon, it didn't have like in track editor. So a lot of stuff that was done in the editor for Blood Dragon related to the platforming, to the AI of enemies, and all that kind of stuff was done in a very rudimentary, this is purely for developers way.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, so if we actually release it, we have to like polish it in all these sort of ways. I was like, yeah, no, we're not doing that way. So yeah, but in general, but on Trials Rising, well, again, in terms of like specific challenges, yeah, there's a lot of them. In terms of like overall challenge, I suppose there's always this overall desire to make sure that players are not disappointed,
Right.
which you can't obviously control that as a
Yeah.
developer. Like even if you're doing everything right, somebody, because tastes are different, there somebody will be disappointed about something. Everybody has their own opinions. That's fine. But it's like, hey, there's all these people who are really strongly into the series, and it's like how to make sure that they are satisfied with the games we make.
For sure. All right. Well, the last question I had prepared is a more open-ended one. So I was wanting to ask if there's any stories or information about the games or the development which you've always wanted to be able to share but never had the chance. So anything unrelated to stuff I've asked, doesn't even have to be that important, but just if you have any things that you've, wanted to be able to share about it, I'd love to get the chance to hear them before we have to part ways today.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the Nintendo Switch port was a big technical achievement. One of most of it was done by one programmer from our team, who was like he's a literal wizard. And of course, there was like support from some other programmers and artists and level designers because a lot of stuff had to be adapted for the Switch version.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the biggest achievement for the Switch version was that and why we have kept it as cross-platform with all other versions, because we knew that if
Mm-hmm.
we wouldn't be able to do that, then it would have to be on a it wouldn't be fair competition, so it would have to be separate. But yeah, it's internally it is even though the rendering happens at 30 FPS, internally all the inputs and all the physics are handled at 60 FPS.
Right.
So if you're making the exact same stick movements as on like a PlayStation version and on Switch version, then the behavior is exactly the same. Obviously, there might be some differences in reaction because 30 FPS you skip every other 30 FPS rendering, visual rendering, you skip every other frame, so maybe you don't react to something as fast as you'd be able to on like the other platforms, but the actual gameplay is exactly the same. And it was like this weird feeling when like the Switch version was announced and shown, and like a lot of people were like, 30 FPS, it's bad, just because when you see just the visuals like Trials, it's gonna be unplayable. But then when people actually played it, everybody was going like, oh, this works really well, this is like really nice, and that's because of this this approach that our programmers have managed to implement, that yeah, it's yeah, the visual rendering is handled 30 fps.
Mm-hmm.
The internal rendering of inputs and physics, which is like the actual gameplay,
Mm-hmm.
was handled at 60.
Right.
And that's why the gameplay on the Switch version feels the same, and that's why we kept it as cross-platform. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a very clever solution. I don't know if I've heard about other games doing that.
Yeah, of course, visually a lot of tracks had to be changed. Like we have added a bunch of fogs to a bunch of tracks. We have removed a lot
Right.
of like background objects, like decreased the texture sizes and all that kind of stuff. And not every, we had to put some size limits on the tracks shared from editor. So regrettably, Switch players can't download absolutely every track because some tracks
Mm.
are just like, uh, the platform can't handle them.
Right.
Uh, because there are tracks that just like, take advantage to the absolute maximum, like the power of like
Yeah.
PlayStation 4 and Xbox One.
Yeah, people got really crazy with them.
Yeah, and those tracks, so we had to put like stricter limits on like the amount of objects that were permissible for Switch. So there had to be compromises made, but the core campaign, the core competitive gameplay, there's full parity there, and we were really proud of that. One thing, by the way, one thing that is sort of like disappointed me, and I don't know, maybe you would like to add this to this
For
like
sure. Yeah.
information, but it's just like my personal opinion, I suppose. But one thing that has disappointed me, Trials Rising as it is now, like the way players interact with it now, is there's this when you enter, there's like these three big buttons on the very first home screen.
Mm-hmm.
So the concept behind them, so basically what we wanted to do is, hey, you might just want to play something quickly. So it's basically you press A, and you're in the game.
Right.
And this thing on the home system, I actually, and I'm disappointed because I have spent a lot of time on it myself, because
Right.
on making it. But there's a whole priority system which defines like what would be the most appropriate content for you based on your medals, your
Mm.
contracts, your challengers, your all the stuff in the game, how it's going to be prioritized, so that every time you enter the game, we would choose like the most appropriate thing for you on that screen, on that big button, and also second and third priority on those two other buttons. Of course, since this is like a home screen, what we also have added is possibility to showcase sales or DLC, release DLCs or something like that, links to store, in case like that would be necessary at some point. And it was a bit disappointing to me that when I entered the Trials Rising for the first time, 5 years have passed. I decided, okay, I want to see now what is the result, and I entered and I saw that all three of those buttons are just like links to store, links to Uplay,
Mm.
links to DLC, links to that, and it's like, and they're permanent there. Every time you run, they were set up to be permanent links, and that was extremely disappointing for me, because the whole point was that this you can still get that experience offline, but offline you can't really compete with other players. So it's like, so yeah, so what was supposed to be the quickest way to get into the game
Right.
is you will be able to just like press A, you're in it. That was like the concept, and you're in what is like the most appropriate content for you. And which would also have included, that on the world map we can share some tracks from paid by players.
Mm-hmm.
But that was also like part of those priorities. Like maybe some, you have completed all levels, have gold on all, levels, and just like interested in like maybe just like user generated things. We assume based on like these priorities. It's like then you would be just maybe like, hey, get a new track.
And also it'd bring people into the community more as well.
Yeah, yeah. So that was like a big important thing, and to see that players now every time they enter, they essentially have to make this uh, what was it, right trigger, and then go into all the time they have to like
Yeah,
switch to a category and go to the world map,
yeah,
just like start selecting tracks. It sort of like defeats the entire purpose of that home screen as it originally was, because there's
right.
these permanent store
Yeah,
DLC links, even if you own DLC, because
yeah.
it's like those they don't check if you own the DLC. It's just like, hey, here's a link to the DLC.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear that because I know when I was doing research and looking at a lot of stuff players have been saying, I did notice some people complained about the lack of an easy way to jump in. So it's interesting to hear that was part of the original plan, but
I mean, and as far as I'm aware, it actually did work like that on launch as well.
mm,
But people who like support the game, and people change who work, and at some point, somebody has put in like those permanent links, and it stayed
right,
like that since then.
right.
Um, and yeah, that was disappointing, because
Mm,
again, and because we were so proud. Again, it's a little thing, because it's like, but we were so proud of how it turned out, because it was like, hey,
yeah, yeah,
you get home like from work, launch trials rising, you see the start screen, you press A, and then you see this button of, hey, you can go into this track, this is the most appropriate content for you now,
hmm,
based on your like progression and progress and skill levels. Like, okay, A, you go in, you're in it, you don't have to think about what to do. We're really proud of that, and it's pretty sad that players nowadays, they can't experience that online.
yeah, yeah. Because I know for me, one of the reasons I've liked Trials is that the fairly bite-sized nature of each one of the levels means that it could be a fun thing, as you say, like you have 15, 20 minutes to kill. It's great to be able to just, pull up one track and usually,
Yeah,
fits into that. So I can see how the design would support that.
the Trials of Fusion and Trials of the Blood Dragon, they used basically they used Adobe Flash for the interface, some Flash Air or some sort of like or Fire, or
Okay.
basically, but for Rising, Ubisoft has mandated to change to its internal middleware solution.
Mm,
And the internal middleware solution at that time wasn't fully properly finished, even as like a version 1.0.
mm,
A lot of features were missing, and we actually had to like request a lot of stuff. Like, I think you couldn't even make like things go transparent on edges and stuff like that at some point.
okay.
So the reason why like the interface on Trials Rising is this very blocky, very with very simple color scheme, black and cyan and white and some other colors, and like a lot of blockiness, is because of this, because like we were very limited with what we could do with UI. So we had to just take advantage as much as possible of just like basic shapes, basic colorization, basic stuff. And then at some point, as the features we requested were getting added in, we could, you know, add a bit more fanciness there and there. But yeah, it was a bit of a challenge, because it was a new unproven middleware, and it wasn't fully ready for development, and we had to use it.
Right.
Our UI artists and UI designers and UI programmers all had some fun with that.
I can imagine. But that also it did remind me of something I was curious about. Uh, and if you don't know about this side of it, that's fair. But when they make the times required for the different medals, is there somebody at Red Links or Ubisoft Cube who is actually just grinding out playing them to find the fastest time they could possibly get? Or were the really high times, like the diamond medals, were they just theoretically what you thought players could hit?
No, none of the times are theoretical.
Okay.
All medal times is somebody has reached them
Right.
those times, so we know that it's possible. But it's I didn't. So I'm not the my trials limit is about goldish,
Right. Right.
some easier platinums. I'm not like the most advanced player in the world, but the level designers are
Okay.
that work at Red Bull. And yeah, a lot of them were playing those tracks, and yeah, I mean, first they have a rule like you have to be able to properly finish the track yourself before it go into production,
Yeah,
not go
that
into the build.
makes sense.
But then also it's like, yeah, when setting up the times, it's like it's people playing and seeing like if somebody has like managed to achieve that. I don't remember by now like what was the exact system, because it's not something that I was actively part of,
Right.
because again I can't reach what would be like the platinum and diamond
Right.
medals.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, some people at Red Wings did, and the times were based on that.
Hmm.
Yeah, nothing automatic.
Okay. Yeah. I imagine. I don't know whether that would be a fun or very not fun part of development, having to grind out those times, but that's interesting to hear. Yeah, it was actually people doing it.
I mean, it's at least it's sort of natural, because I mean you have to play. I mean, you have to play yours and other people's tracks a lot anyway.
Yeah, you're playing it hundreds of times just while
Yeah,
developing it.
and even though I personally didn't have input on the track development because I'm not a level designer, but I too had to play a lot of the tracks a lot, to the point that there are sometimes the tracks that I have in my memory are actually like a lot different due to all the iterations than they are in the released version. Like for example, I remember the levels in Romania. Yeah, they were extremely different like a year or so in than they are in the release version.
Right.
But the ones that I have in my mind are like those in my memory, like those mid development versions. And yeah, and it's just so you would understand how the track overall track design process works, is that
Hmm.
we have started the game development in 2016, right after Blood Dragon, and most base versions of the tracks were already in about like half a year,
Mm.
and then it was half a year or less than a year for sure, and then like most tracks were already in, and then from that moment onwards, it for the level design was just okay of the whole process of iterating and iterating and iterating and iterating to make sure that the best version possible gets released at the end.
And I guess that also makes me curious. When you're developing the tracks, do the track designers use the same track creation tool that's in the game, or were there different dev tools that were used for doing that?
No, it's the same.
That's cool to know. Also, there is always been a very unique sense of humor in the Trials games. And I'm curious, is there a specific, how do I word it? Like, where did that sense of humor come from? Was it specifically from the original creators, or was it something which just became part of the culture of the development team?
No, a lot of the humor comes from Antti.
Right.
Again, Antti is a pretty eccentric person in his own ways, so a lot of that of his energy was essentially channeled into trials. Obviously, like there are people who have their own inputs there and there, but like the core of like this direction and how it's sort of like trials got this way, it's like yeah, this humor is primarily driven by Anti.
Right.
But obviously, of course, like level designers and people who work on tracks and like doing those little funny things on tracks, like everybody has their own
Mm-hmm.
sense of
Mm-hmm.
humor and stuff like that that they also like try to implement. But for trials as a whole, that would be
Right. Makes sense. With the different bikes that are in the game, I assume that, well, no, I it makes sense that the different tracks are designed around the different bikes and which ones you'd have available, like how in Rising, sort of the mid-game tracks tend to favor the Rhino more because that's the one which you just
Yeah.
unlocked at that point, and then they get more technical later, and you get the Mantis, which has more of that technical control. But I guess I notice that a lot of the time, the bike which would say is recommended would not end up being the one that the players put the fastest times in on. And I guess I wonder if that's something that was a surprise or if that was something that you expected to happen.
I mean, I suppose the answer to that would be both.
Right.
This is something that applies to pretty much the balance of absolutely every game.
Right.
Trials, so I don't know, StarCraft, Hearthstone, like Blizzard stuff, or Rainbow Six Siege at Ubisoft, or absolutely anything ever that has balance. It's like, yes, you can spend a lot of time, your development team, your QA, testing things out, seeing how it works, what's works best, what's how things are balanced, and in terms of bikes, it's like what would be like the recommended bike. But then the amount of time you can put in can never compare to when the game gets live, and
Right.
then millions of people actually play it,
Yeah.
and then it's like, oh, okay, hey, so things turn out to be a little bit different than expected. Mm.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I guess I'd ask if there's any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave people with, anything that, if there isn't any more Trials games made, if there's anything that you'd like when people look back on them, what you'd like people to remember or to think about it, or what the perspective is from the real people who actually worked on it, if that makes any sense.
I remember at one point the Red Links and Ubisoft Kiev, we have received an email from a person who was telling how playing Trials Rising on a tandem bike, I think, has helped them to reconnect with their father.
Hmm.
Find that connection because it's like, they had to cooperate and work together, and somehow that has helped them channel that.
Hmm.
The game has helped to channel their reconnection, which, yeah, it's obviously always really, you know feels really nice whenever stories like that happen, and like let you know that, hey, it's like the game that you work on has helped somebody. But ultimately, this is not the point I'm getting at. The point I'm getting at is that, um and comes back to the things that I've talked about, like, hey, what we have defined as pillars, what we wanted like the players to feel. Like, community has always been a very core thing to Trials as a brand, Trials as a franchise, and these games live by their community, and Trials players are some of the most invested players into any game in the world. So ultimately, the message I have would be, as long as you find ways to connect with each other through Trials, as long as you form these friendships and bonds and competitions, and as long as you make stuff for Trials, for the tracks and for like customization, even if there will never be a new Trials game, Trials will never die.
All right. Well, I think that would be a great note to leave it on. So, thank you very much for your time today. I really
No
appreciate
problem.
it. It's been great talking and really interesting to hear this stuff because, as I mentioned in the video, there's not a lot of stuff about the actual development of the Trials series out there on the internet. So, getting to hear some of it has been a real pleasure. So, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you as well. It was nice talking to you. And yeah, hope you found this whole conversation is going to be useful for you, and you can make something interesting out of it.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, I find that the stories behind the making of games and the people behind the making of them, for me, are just as interesting as the actual games themselves. So I think that, at the very least for me, I find it, something that really of value, because I think a lot of people forget, especially with the way you interact with games, where it can sort of feel like it's almost your own in a sense. People forget how many people and how many real people went into the making of these things. And so I think being able to put a face and a voice to all of those stories and all of those hours and all of that passion that goes into creating a project that people fall in love with like that is really something of value. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be able to share some of that with us. So thank you.
Thank you as well. I'm glad that we have had this conversation. I know that we have discussed having it for a very long time.
It's all good. I was in no rush. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I wish you
You
the
too.
best of luck in your future.
Thank you. Likewise.
All
See
right.
you.
Goodbye.
Bye.